Welcome to Cultivating Victory. This is our second episode in 2017. I'm here today with Glenn Schultz from Schultz Family Farms. And our guest is Suzanne Ricketts from Plano, Texas. And she's going to talk with us a little bit about the home food production she's got going in Plano, and also about what inspired her to go that direction and start growing food at home.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share what has become a big passion for me. I was lucky enough to have a mother that I credit with getting me started on an interest in nutrition, not really as a child, but it sort of implants itself when you're around it. And I had a garden early on in my adult life, but it was way too much work. I couldn't keep it up. I maybe had it for a year or two, and that was about it. So I went on and had my corporate career, and after that, I started getting more into entrepreneurship and attended a permaculture class. And as most people, I guess, even before that, as most people, my interest was piqued in nutrition and health, partly due to, as most people, an illness. And I had what I call my life-changing autoimmune illness in 2001. If I hadn't been able to solve that, or at least eradicate some of it, I wouldn't have really been able to have had any more of my career, I believe. So all that culminates in my current interest, and I by chance attended a permaculture class in 2014, and it just drew me in. It was my soul. The whole idea of permaculture is multifaceted, from patterns in the world, the biological and physical world, to growing your own food and using nature to maximize the benefit of that. So shortly after that, I met Mary Lucero and learned much more about, she used the term food insecurity, and that opened up a whole new view for me as well. And as I got more and more interested in this, what's supposed to be an easier way of gardening and growing your own food, healthy food, nutrient-dense food, I found another technique as well called wood chip gardening, and that has a lot of overlap with permaculture. And I spent probably 3/4 of a year delving into all the theory and knowledge, learning, and finally decided, you know, if I don't just get started, I'll never get started, because I'll never know it all. And thank goodness I did, because you learn just as much or more from actually doing it and figuring it out, connecting the dots, and just seeing, observing, that just adds to the education level tremendously for me.
That's interesting. Libby Hamilton spoke with us on Tuesday about teaching agriculture, and that was her big point. You've got to get people out there doing things, get their hands in the dirt. And,
for sure. Yeah, as I listened to her.
Can we back up? You said you had this autoimmune condition. You reversed it, and then you continued looking for healthier ways with your food and so forth, and that drew you into permaculture. What were some of the things you did prior to jumping into the home gardening?
I changed my diet, and I experimented, and I had some very profound results with eating more raw food, taking digestive enzymes, and what I call body transformation from taking liquid minerals, which to me was so profound that it told me, it really cemented what you hear, is that our food doesn't have minerals in it anymore. I can't even begin to describe that transformation in me, because it just was so profound. So I also had little simple things when I was in my early 20s. I had some acne problems, and I had them for a year or two. And one day I woke up and my acne problem was gone overnight. And I was like, what happened? And it's a long trail to figure out that I had eaten a golden delicious apple the day before. Excuse me. And I thought, could it be that that had such a major impact on my skin? And so I would veer off of that and come back. I did a lot of testing, and I tested with other apples, but golden delicious apple was the only one that would do that to me. And it was effective overnight. So that was very attention getting. Things like that. And then later, I am on a ketogenic diet and have been for 8 years. So that has had a big impact on my health as well. So I started with a blank grassy lawn. I didn't want to till it, and I couldn't till it. I don't have the strength. We have clay in Texas, and there's just no way to get a tiller in that hardly, unless you get a tractor in there. So I started out doing what they call sheet mulching or wood chip gardening, layering of cardboard to kill the grass, and then about a 6 to 8 inch layer of leaves and a 6 to 8 inch layer of wood chips. And over the course of 6 months, that 16 inches was decomposed down to maybe 6 inches. So the idea is to build the soil from the top down. And as that soil builds on top, it starts to work its way down into the clay as well. It's a long process, I've learned, and I've had to punt a little bit and bring in a lot of compost to help build that soil. But it has worked pretty well. And I think that I've come away thinking that a lot of things, but we have too many people in silos that are making decisions about our food systems that are removed from them. They don't understand them. And it's not that different than many things in life, where you have engineers making decisions about biological systems, and they don't even know about biological systems. So another thing I think this helps to contribute from an educational perspective, and even from my own perspective of getting from a view of I can't, transitioning to a view of how can I. And that applies to so many things in life, not just gardening. So as with many, I was able to transform my health very quickly. I turned it on a dime, actually. But I think that fear of ever getting in that situation again has been my driving force to stay on top of autoimmune issues and health issues in general, because I never want to return to that. And I thought, why is it such a fluke that I was able to turn mine when other people have such a difficult time? Is it going to come back? What can I do to prevent? And of course, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure, I believe. So it's opened a lot of new views as well. So 2 years ago, I started this probably with my big garden in the back, and I can share some pictures unfortunately, I lost my before pictures, but if you just picture just a grass lawn, and I don't have those pictures, unfortunately. But one of the first signs of doing something right, according to Dr. Mary Lucero, is some mushrooms. And the mushrooms in this picture are hard to see probably, but if you look closely, you might be able to see them. It's an indication of good bacterial things happening and the breaking down of the soil. And I've been amazed at the number of variety of mushrooms I've seen in my wood chips over the course of the last 1.5 to 2 years. This was my garden last spring. I had started with 1 row. I now have 4 to 5 rows of growth. And this was at the beginning of last growing season. I had some plants in, they were starting to flourish. I didn't even have all my tomato plants. In the background there, you can still see wood chips. This whole area became not just a food forest, but a food jungle. I couldn't get in it myself. And so in just a year of doing this, I could not believe the transformation I had in my backyard. This is one of my favorite things because I had a tomato plant that was way overgrown in an area that I planted too many things in, and it was just becoming untenable. And here's an example of what do you do? How do you control this tomato plant? So I put this fencing up, and it worked perfectly. It controlled it, it made it go up, and I still was able to have these other plants around it. This is Malabar spinach in the front. There's a little lavender on the left and some sage on the right. Malabar spinach is one of my favorites now. It doesn't taste like spinach. It's not really spinach. It's almost a light succulent, but it loves the heat, absolutely loves the heat, and grows like crazy in the summer. So in those times of summer that are so hard to grow. So this is just some of the produce that I got this year. Some of the visitors you get that come to see you is wonderful, unexpected, surprising, educational. I love this sort of thing. Dinosaur kale has become my favorite kale. I don't even grow any other kind now. It's just so easy to clean. It's less prone to bugs, and it's not as bitter as other kale. I had a little sunflower forest this year in an area that was fallow, and I used it to build some soil to some depth. That was a lot of fun. I'd never grown sunflowers before. And this was what I was thinking was my summer's last hurrah. It's a little medium-sized watermelon, but I've since had many, many more tomatoes out of this year's garden. So that's just kind of an example of what can be done in I think this area, and I've grown it I've expanded much more this year, but last year it's 48 by 22 feet. And I had an overabundance of produce this year in a year and a half after starting this. I didn't know what to do with it all, really. I have earthworms where I never had them. As I dug down in to plant a tree this year in my wood chips, I found a toad buried down in the wood chips. So you just don't know what you're contributing to out there in the way of nature and helping it thrive and do what it's supposed to do.
Now, you guys weren't in the heat of the storms this summer, but you got some weather from that, right?
We did.
The garden, or?
Not really, no. We never got any spin-off from the rain, but we had a wonderful year, very unusual, a rain about every 2 weeks, just enough to not to have to water anything. And I did have to water my garden because I had small, delicate plants going and that sort of thing. But from an overall perspective, we've been in a drought similar to Las Cruces, and this year was just wonderful from a rain perspective. If you could plan it that way, every year would be so wonderful, but it's the outlier, not the norm, for sure.
So Suzanne, what percentage of your food do you get out of the garden?
Good point, Mary. I pretty much eat year-round out of the garden now. One of the tenets of permaculture is to eat seasonally, and behind growing local food, right? I mean, eat what is available, and I pretty much eat year-round. I've learned that carrots are a winter plant. They love cold weather. They don't really like heat, that sort of thing. And so I have pretty much, I'm going out to the garden every day to harvest something for meals.
Your tight soils before you added the wood chip, cardboard, and the leaves. Now, what are your soils like? Describe that for us.
Yes, Glenn. They're still developing underneath. It's still pretty heavy clay. I can see where roots are being able to penetrate more and more, but and that's something I learned. I thought it might transform in 2 years. I think it's going to take 3 to get some depth of very porous, non-compactable, moisture retentive soil. That's my goal based on what I've seen as possible, but it will take some time.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think that's possible with starting out with something that's almost as hard as concrete, you know.
Yes,
To think
it
that
is.
you're going to be able to just take your hands and dig as deep as you like.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Oh my gosh.
And mulching is a big part of that. Just that wood chip, hay mulch, leaf mulch, any kind of mulching is
Yes.
system.
To help to retain the moisture especially, and encourage the microbes and all
The
else.
earthworms, yeah, and just loosen it up.
Yes.
It works. How about so you mentioned pests? So are you your growing system? Are you permaculturist? Do they use pesticides and herbicides? Doing things.
They use nature, the power of nature. They will use plants to draw in, let's say, wasps or whatever that will eat the pests that are causing a problem. You know, once you know your area, of course, things change from year to year, even what pests you get. But I think as you learn what are pollinators that draw in the right things from nature that are predators to the pests, that's the idea. So no pesticides.
So
And
do you have some plants, Suzanne, that you're using specifically like this to draw in the predators?
I did plant what's called borage this year, and it is supposed to deter the little green worms on tomatoes, or the big hornworms on tomatoes, and I had no hornworms this year. So, and I didn't even know how close they had to be. I planted it away, and then some in a little bit in my rows, but I had 4 rows of tomatoes, and I had no hornworms this year. That was an outlier for sure.
It's pretty good success in the first year to have that happen, right? So that's great.
I was happy. Yes.
Yeah.
So how has gardening changed you?
I like to think that it is me, so it hasn't changed me that much. It's educated me, but the practices and the pragmatism and the whole, everything is part of a system concept has always been my mindset since being a child. So what I have learned is there's so much to learn, but not to let it hold you back, because you can learn things in so many ways, as I mentioned earlier. And I wish I'd known about this practice earlier in my life, for sure, because I could have had a garden for 30 years now and have that soil just as good as Paul Gauchi's. Presumably.
That's a nice comparison to Libby's discussion on Tuesday, because she's working with young people who are just getting started, and I think it is something that you learn across a lifetime. You're never there.
Yeah. How can we ever know as much as nature any more than we can know as much about our body as our body knows about itself? And it's just so complex and variable. As Rayadet says, it's a complex, chaotic system.
Thank you again, Suzanne, for sharing. It's always great to hear from you and see the progression that
Thank you.
is going on. It's really been fun watching your garden expand and your skills expand.
Thank you.
Those are great pictures. It looks like things are growing very well in Plano.